Hello, and welcome back to Warning Signs. I am Kate Majot, a domestic violence survivor, therapist, and author. This podcast is my serial narration of my Warning Signs book series as I turn them each into audiobooks. Warning Signs is my memoir about domestic violence. It feels like a fun romance adventure story, but after each chapter, I explain the domestic violence that was occurring. According to the Human Rights Campaign, 35% of heterosexual women, 44% of lesbians, 61% of bisexual women, and 54% of transgender people have experienced domestic violence. The National Coalition for Domestic Violence reports the following numbers for men: 26% of gay men, 37% of bisexual men, and 29% of heterosexual men. Domestic violence affects all of us. Listen on to learn about how it happened, to help yourself and others heal, and to prevent it from continuing to happen. As the book and podcast series progress, there will be a few episodes with more extreme emotional and physical violence. I will make a trigger warning before these chapters. Thank you for being courageous enough to listen, and be sure to give yourself some healing time and space between episodes, especially as we progress in the series. To all of the survivors out there, this is for you. Thank you. In this short episode, Jason and I discuss our futures together. Chapter 8, Following. The next spring, in 2011, about a year and a half after we moved to Vegas, I asked Jason, "What are your thoughts for the future?" Taken aback and pausing from his usual jumpy nature, he stopped and squarely faced me. His voice heightened as he asked, "What do you mean? I like our routine. I don't think too much about the future." But I thought about it a lot. I wanted more in life. I was shaking on the inside, but I replied as calmly as possible and said, "Well, when we first started dating, I talked about how we both want to get married, buy a house, and have kids. I'm about to turn 28, and I want to have kids before I'm 30. He sat down. He seemed to be mentally preparing himself to focus on the conversation. I followed his lead and sat down next to him. I slowly breathed in the faint scent of jasmine flowers in the distance. I tried to remain calm, but instead I spoke as though I was running a marathon. "Well, I want to be married for at least 2 years before we have kids so we can feel really comfortable being married first. And I want to buy a house after we get married, so ideally we would do that within our first year of marriage so we can get through the home buying process and get used to being homeowners and have a nice house in a good neighborhood where we can raise our kids." When I get excited, nervous, or both, I speak in quick run-on sentences. I worry the other person might try and shut down my ideas before hearing my complete thought, so I try and get it out as quickly as I can. My parents taught me to always defend my thoughts and actions, to prove I knew who I was and that I was making conscious decisions. I always felt I needed to prove myself to Jason, but not because he wanted me to make good choices, but because he always wanted to prove that he was right and made better decisions than I did. He stared at me blankly while I tried to process my words. I smiled broadly and continued, "So, if we get engaged within the next year, I think we can achieve this plan. What do you think? Do you like this plan?" He leaned his head back and exhaled. "Whoa, that's a lot to take in." He angled his body away from me and looked away. "I know," I gently replied with a small pout. I wanted to stroke his arm to calm him down, but I could tell he needed space. We had similar conversations before, so I knew it would be okay. Yet, it was the first time we really talked about everything concretely with a timeline in mind, and I could tell he was uncomfortable. I felt guilty for overwhelming him. I focused on breathing steadily and staying strong. These quote unquote successful life steps had been on my mind for years, and I finally felt ready to get them off my chest and make them happen. I was happy to fully open myself to a boyfriend I loved. I knew he just needed a minute to process everything. I reminded myself of all this while I attempted to patiently wait for his response. After a few moments, he turned his body toward me and calmly looked at me. "Well, it makes sense, but Do we really need to be married 2 whole years before we have kids? Yes, I persisted, speaking excitedly in run on sentences again. My mom always said she recommends waiting 2 years before having children, as that's what she did, and even that wasn't a long enough time because she and my dad still ended up getting divorced. But she has always insisted that she is happy she had my sister and I, and she doesn't regret it. Even so, she recommends waiting 2 years before having kids and then being engaged for at least a year before getting married, and I think that makes sense. Defensively whining, he responded, "But your parents got divorced. Mine are still together, and they didn't wait that long before getting married or having kids. Maybe we can revisit this conversation in a few months." He basically suggested we wait to get engaged and then shorten the timeline of having children. Gently, I responded, "I know. It sounds like we are saying we want the same thing, but at different paces. But don't you think it makes more sense to wait before each big life decision? At the same time, though, I feel like I'm ready to get this ball rolling because I'm already 28, and at this rate, I'll still be past my goal of kids before 30. Hmm, I see, he said, pouting. He took a deep breath, and then his eyes glimmered, and a smile spread on his face. Well, yeah, that does make sense. Okay, yeah. I guess I haven't thought about the future too much, but I want kids before I'm 32. And with this plan, it will be before I'm 30. But ha, you'll be 31, he teased me as he often did. I laughed and agreed, and we hugged each other closely and kissed. We were ready to start our lives together. Chapter 8, Warning Signs. The main issue in this chapter is that I pushed our relationship forward, even though it was clear he was telling me he wasn't ready. I was so determined to keep my life plan on track that I continued moving forward without giving it much thought if it was the right relationship or time for us. A more minor warning sign is that he made me feel I had to prove myself. In a healthy relationship, partners support each other and accept each other without judgment. No one needs to prove themselves to the other people because both people accept each other. Jason, on the other hand, always seemed as though he was proving to me that he was right about everything, even when they were generally just a matter of differing opinions, such as what movie to watch. I also wrote that I felt guilty for overwhelming him, but I was really just attempting to have a mature conversation about making plans for the future. People should not have to feel guilty for bringing up difficult conversation topics, no matter how difficult. He also teased me about my age in this conversation, which is not necessarily a warning sign because gentle teasing happens in healthy relationships too. What makes it more difficult to determine whether or not this was a warning sign is that he emotionally abused me in the form of quote unquote jokes, so it was hard to tell the difference. I think to determine whether or not the jokes or teasing are indeed those or are emotional abuse is how the words make you feel. If you are genuinely laughing along with them, then I think it counts as teasing. If you are not, and your instincts tell you something is wrong, then it is emotional abuse. Thank you for listening to this episode of Warning Signs. The music in this episode is Skipping Stones by Ian Post. Will Downing produces the audio editing. For more about me and my group therapy and workshops, please see my website at www.katemageau.com. The link is in the show notes, and it is spelled www.katemageau.com. And if you can't wait to hear what happens next, you can buy my books on my website. Thank you so much for your support. You can also support me by downloading episodes, as each download gives me a tiny commission. Liking and subscribing also help. Thank you. I appreciate you. I'll see you next week.